Hey everyone, I was morning. Um, is it? Yeah, it's still morning right now. Afternoon. It's a little bit afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm really excited to be joining today with some good friends and talk about native plants and talk about birds. That's my jam. I am currently at the Audubon Center at Debs Park, which is this beautiful area here. I know it may have looked like a background, but I am the center director here at Audubon Center at Debs Park. We're located in Los Angeles, uh, Highland Park area, where we've been for just over 20, coming on 20 years. We're gonna have 20 years in the community, and yeah, I'm really excited to be joining in this conversation.
And I can go next. Hi, everybody. My name is John Roden. I am as well based in Los Angeles. I'm on the west side, though. I'm in Venice. And I work for the National Audubon Society. I oversee our bird-friendly communities conservation strategy, which includes our Plants for Birds program. And am very excited to be here today to help celebrate California Native Plant Week. And I will pass it over to Evan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining, and thanks to Audubon for having me here. This is super exciting. I'm Evan Meyer. I'm the executive director at Theodore Payne Foundation, which you'll hear more about in a second. But I just want to comment on the fact that I think that this conversation about the horticulture industry, native plants, and how that factors into the wild landscapes and all the ecosystems that support is super exciting to be having, and kudos to Audubon for organizing this, and kudos to all of you for tuning in today to join this conversation.
That's perfect. So, Barcos, we're here to talk about native plants and why native plants for birds are so important. So, can you tell us a little bit about the importance of these native plants for these animals?
Yeah, and I think that's the question, like why natives? Why native plants? And I could just say because they're awesome and then leave it at that. But I think I'll go into a little bit of the reasons why we like to promote native plants and also just be an example of what native plants can look like year round. One thing about native plants that is vital and very, very important to birds in the habitat is that it creates habitat. It provides food, it provides shelter, provides all of these things for not just birds, but also the insects and a lot of the small mammals and reptiles that are needed to really have a healthy ecosystem. What is important that we like to share about native plants is also that as we develop our cities and in all of these areas across the country, we're introducing a lot of different plants and trees into that environment. And what we do when we reintroduce these native plants back into our ecosystem is we're starting to provide pockets of habitat that these birds, small mammals, small reptiles can also live. So one thing that we look at is when we're putting in native plants, again, it's all about habitat. It's all about food. We have berries that are coming out on a lot of the plants, flowers for the pollinators. And then as these plants start to live their cycle, they create nesting material. So especially right now, as we go through this process, one of the things that we're looking at is making sure that material stays in the yard and that it plays a role and continues its role for what we're looking at. The other piece is some of these flowers are, let me rephrase that. All of these flowers are super beautiful and they're super cool when you're able to just look at the growth pattern and how the structure is of a lot of these plants. Like you have these wild names like sticky monkey flower. Like you can only imagine what that looks like. So hummingbird sage, like, does it look like a hummingbird or does it feed hummingbirds? So it's kind of fun when you get into some of these details. So Yeah, I think that's where we go for native plants. And one thing that I did not say yet is the amount of water that we are saving. Again, people say, oh, so you don't need to use water when you plant these. Any plant is going to need water, especially when you establish these plants. When you first plant them and you put them in the ground, they will need water. So it's not like you can just plant them and then forget them. What we look at is it's a small percentage or a smaller percentage of some of the turf that people are using, some of the trees that are out there, and it's really more bang for your buck, because once you get them established, they are able to then live a cycle and adapt to the weather patterns that we have locally. So that is a really important piece. Everything that we have here at Debs Park, if you come out, we're having a Theodore Payne's garden tour this weekend. So if you get a chance to come out and look at the plants, the only thing that is on irrigation or gets irrigated is the plants that we've recently planted. Everything else has adapted to the climate patterns that we have, including drought. So yeah, that's us. And if you have any questions, if I didn't cover anything, you can definitely ask in the questions, and we can get to it for sure.
So by landscaping with native plants, we can really restore a lot of bird habitat and really be able to provide these animals what they need. And Marcos mentioned Theodore Payne Foundation, and Evan is from Theodore Payne Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes, thank you so much. And just before I jump into Theodore Payne and what we do, I wanted to just sort of piggyback on some of the things that Marcos was saying. And one interesting, and this is going to lead into what Theodore Payne does, but one interesting thing that I always see is we have organizations that focus on the natural habitats, and I would put Audubon in that group and other large organizations. Then there's so that's sort of one thing. And then often that's very distinct from the world of the garden world and the ornamental horticulture world and the landscaping world. And if you walk into a Home Depot nursery center, how disconnected that is from the idea of, the wild hills and the habitat around where you live. So that's kind of a problem right now. And that's one that I think we need to address as a society and as a culture, that we've created this sort of artificial distinction between the human world and the non-human world. And the place that you really see that playing out is in our landscapes, because we often have imported garden traditions, we've imported plants, we've imported water to make it all happen, particularly here in Southern California, in a way that removes what was here before, and it doesn't honor the life that was here before, particularly, and that plays out throughout the whole sort of ecosystem, throughout the food chain. So that you'll see much less native bird diversity when there's no native plants and we just have pavement. So that's really what we do at Theodore Payne Foundation, is try to use the horticulture industry and the garden world to solve environmental problems through restoring nature in the urban environment. We do that through a number of ways. We have a nursery that's a retail nursery and as well as a small wholesale operation, but primarily retail, where we grow about 150,000 plants a year on site here, and we sell many more than that. And we do all kinds of outreach, including coming up this weekend. You're not going to be able to see it because of my filter over here. This is our native plant garden tour. Okay, I'll hold it so that it catches the camera. This is a beautiful booklet. Tickets are available now. This is basically a choose your own adventure across Southern California, across Los Angeles, with 34 of the most visionary landscapes in our region. And it highlights how beautiful native plant gardens can be. Audubon Center at Debs Park is one of the stops along the way. And so you can go and meet Marcos. And tickets are available for this at our nursery, also at a couple other nurseries in town. I'll put this in the chat, but it's Artemisia Nursery and Plant Material Nursery. So outreach is a big component. We have a YouTube channel with all sorts of videos, everything from instructional videos to chats and talks. Then we do outreach all across the city, kind of doing grassroots, community-oriented efforts to engage people in the idea that, you know, the landscape industry is really important in the environmental conversation and in the conservation conversation, and that we should be using these tools that we have, which is, you know, choosing plants and choosing things to benefit nature during this era of extinction that we're living through right now. You know, I don't want to sugarcoat things too much. Is that the reason we advocate for this is because we've done a lot of damage. A lot of damage has been done to our land, and we can restore that through gardening. One last thing I'll mention that I'm really excited about is a partnership that we are forming right now with Audubon through Marcos and through the Audubon Center at Debs, which is basically just a partnership to operate their Los Nogales nursery, which is a wonderful native plant nursery that's been up for a number of years now, growing beautiful local restoration plants. So it's all hyper local things. Los Nogales means the walnuts in Spanish, and it's cool to have that right in the shadow of these native stands of walnuts that are these beautiful stands of walnuts at Debs Park. So we'll be scaling up that operation with very much within the original intent of the nursery, which is to collect local seeds, grow local plants to support local habitats and local birds. And it's very easy to do. All these things, these tools are at our disposal. We just need to make the decision to choose this path. And it's amazing to see over 200 people watching right now on a Tuesday at lunchtime. That shows that there is a lot of energy behind this movement right now. And it's exciting to be part of it. So I'm looking forward to talking more about native plants and their connection with birds. And I'll pass it off to John.
Yes, John, tell us a little bit about it's migration season. There's spring migration happening right now. So native plants in this spring migration, what would you like to share?
Sure, and I could probably chew up the rest of this hour talking about this, but I'll keep it brief because I know we want to get to questions and everything. And when I was thinking about this, we are in migration in the, you know, we sit here in the Pacific Flyway and there's birds moving through. Some of them are moving from here to the north where they may be breeding, some from south of here to, and just coming through. And I think that, you know, as Marcos was talking, right, and we were talking, there's the plants are providing resources directly, either through, you know, seeds or nectar, those sorts of things, and also indirectly by hosting insects. And you know, one of the things that's really critical as birds are moving through, particularly as we're moving into breeding season, is providing them with high quality food that they can eat. And natives are great for that, again, directly. And I think of things like, you know, we have birds like rufous hummingbirds coming through, having plants that provide nectar for them. And I think of the salvias, right? I think of the sages that are starting to flower, right? So like I have Cleveland sages here in my yard. Those are flowering, and I definitely see the hummers coming to that. Things like blue palo verde is another species that I think, you know, is in pretty strong bloom right now. Certainly in this part of Southern California. And you know, one thing I was thinking about was last year. I haven't been able to get out to the desert this spring, but last year I saw all of the Western warbler species in the blue palo verde that were blooming, right? And so it's a feast, right? It's a banquet for those birds, right? Both directly, they're fussing around, pulling nectar out and stuff, but they're just heaving with insects, right? And that's really critical for them. So I think that those are ones I thought about. I've also thought about, you know, moving up into more northern parts of the state, because those tend to be more southern, the ones I've mentioned. You know, things like Toyon. Toyon does flower. It has tiny flowers, right? Those are going to be starting to bloom. Haven't really seen them blooming yet, the Toyon around here at least, but and then the other one I was thinking of was lemonade berry. It was another one that, I mean, and again, I hesitate to start talking about plants because then I'm gonna leave out ones like I love my coffee berry, right? Starting to bloom a little bit as well. So it again is the most of our California natives, right? The seeds, the berries, all of that stuff is going to be later in the year, which will help the birds survive into those drier times of the year and into winter. But they all are hosting insects, which are really critical for the life cycle of birds, not only for the adults that eat them, but feeding their young. It's critical for them to have those insects because those things are providing fat and protein for those chicks. So again, I could go on forever, but I think I'll stop now and we can talk about questions.
There are so many questions coming in. So thank you to all of you who are typing your questions. We are keeping track. One of the questions that keeps coming up is the plants in your background. So Evan, everybody wants to know what's the vine that you can see in that virtual background? And Marcos, what's the tree? So we'll turn it over to Evan first.
Okay, well, so we have a coast live oak is the backdrop of mine. Quercus agrifolia, and then the plant you're seeing behind me is actually not a vine, it's a geophyte or a bulb. It's so heavy with flowers that it pulled itself down under its own weight. This is the Humboldt lily, Lilium humboldtii, which is one of the treasures of Southern California, and you can find these blooming a little later than most native wildflowers. They'll probably bloom in May through June in some of the riparian corridors right outside of LA. So you can go to the San Gabriel Mountains and find them, Santa Monica Mountains. And it's always shocking to people that there's a wildflower that looks like this, covered in flowers, that blooms within a couple miles of downtown Los Angeles. And we do sell these at the nursery. They take a long time to grow. They're very hard to cultivate. They're very rare, so they're a little expensive, but we typically will have these for sale at our nursery. So check them out, the Humboldt lily.
And what I have here is a California sycamore. So this is a really awesome tree, and it's starting to do its thing. These little balls that come out and disperse. I'll show. I don't know if you can see the wonderful canopy that is happening here. I'm sitting in the shade along the barrel. We have some purple sage, which if I can point right there, and it is flowering. And then we have some arroyo willow that is next to our pond. And then we also have Quercus agrifolia, coast live oak. We have California black walnut on this side. And then we have a couple of coyote bush. And then you can't see it, but right over there is some sticky monkey flower, which has these really pretty orange flowers. If I get an opportunity later, maybe I can take the computer over there with the risk of disconnecting completely.
That would be amazing. We do have some of our participants that would like to know what some of these look like up close, and we'll try to share pictures in the future. Now, we had a question in the chat that resonates very much with me. So I love the outdoors, but I don't have a yard of my own. What are some native plants that we could grow in containers to be able to support what the birds may need?
Yeah, so there's a lot that you can do with native plants in containers. We actually offer a class at Theodore Payne every month or so, taught by our nursery manager, Flora Ito. It's all about container gardening with native plants. We also have an LA Times piece. If you Google, like, I can put it in the chat, but you can also just Google LA Times native plants containers, and you'll find the article. So there's tons you can do, and you can grow many things in containers. Some of the plants are going to require much larger containers. So if you're okay with giving up a lot of space, you can grow things like buckwheats and sages, even things like manzanitas and California lilacs will work in containers. You're going to need to devote a lot of space because they're big plants that have big roots. One that we always recommend, because it's really easy in pots and it's beautiful and it smells great, is the hummingbird sage. That can also be grown in varying light conditions. So if you want to, a lot of balconies the light might change over the course of the year. So in those situations, you're going to want something that can handle changing light, and that's a really good option for that.
I can also jump in.
Go ahead, Marcos. Yeah.
Evan,
yeah,
because in addition to everything here, and I think I'll just take the show on the road, because I have some container, well, I guess some potted plants, but native. So check this out. Here is some, let me see, can you see that? It's in
We
It's in
can.
there. So we have some fuchsia, which is in the back on this side. And then this is sticky monkey flower that is not yet in bloom. And then as we take a stroll over here, there's our pond. We have another container with some more fuchsia. But this here is a royal lupin. It already bloomed, and this was the old there, but you can now see the seed pods which are happening. This is an annual, so it only comes out around this time. It'll live its life cycle, drop the seeds. Hopefully these seeds will drop back in the container, and then we will have them again next year. And then here is another sticky monkey flower. You can see this one is getting dried out, and I can tell now the soil is a bit dry. But since I'm here, I will go ahead and show you the flower. See, right here is this sticky monkey flower. The leaves are pretty sticky. And then some folks say that when they look in there, they see a little monkey, but for me, when I look in it, I might be seeing the reflection. So that's the monkey I get to see. I'll go ahead and turn it back to you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to sit down now.
Was there something you wanted to add, John?
I endorse all of those selections that they both said. I would add, so California poppies I love it's our state flower. I think we probably, if you haven't been out to see them in the California Poppy Reserve, do that, but tread lightly, please. But they grow really well. They're self-seeders, so you will get them, year after year. We've done lupins as well, and I love those. And heuchera is another one that I've done in pots, coral bells that do quite well as well. So those are the other ones I thought of beyond the ones that they shared.
Yeah, if I could you made me think, both of you guys talking about annual species. We have a wildflower mix that's devised for containers, a little bit lower growing stuff they'll grow well. And I've seen some remarkable window baskets or balcony kind of like long trenched square planters that you just cast seed into. And you can get like a really awesome wildflower bloom on a balcony that I don't know about its role in bird habitat, but for insect pollinators, it's going to be huge. You get so many insects on those annual wildflowers.
And we have some individuals that are thinking of replacing their entire lawn with native plants, and they would like some tips on how do I even start the process of replacing my lawn.
You want me to jump in? I'll jump in here. There's a couple of things. One is if you're in Los Angeles or Southern California, you can get rebates from the water company. So you might want to start there because you do have to kind of pre-apply, but then they'll give you up to $3 per square foot of lawn removed, which if you're removing 1,000 square feet of lawn, that's a good chunk of money there. So I would start there. And then I always tell people there are two main ways to go about this in terms of figuring out what you want to do. There's the planners who plan everything from the beginning, and they either hire someone or they take one of our classes in design and they do a whole aerial layout. And then there's the people who just want to put plants here and there and see what works and just tinker. I go into the second camp. I'm just let's put this here, that looks good. Okay, we'll see how that goes. So it just really depends on your personality style and how you want to attack it. But the hardest thing for most people is removing the grass. Right now, heading into summer, it's a great time to do sheet mulching, which is probably the easiest way to get rid of the grass. You're going to put cardboard on top of your lawn, cover that in mulch, and just stop watering it. And that will kill the lawn. And by the time planting season comes along, which will be November, December, your lawn will be dead and you'll be ready to get started with your native plants.
Thank you. So we do have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to kind of try to popcorn through this. If you all want to take turns, maybe tackling one or two questions. When is the right and wrong time of the year to plant natives?
I could jump in. So we typically only plant in the fall and spring. Our last planting day is depending on the weather of how warm and how quick it gets. We will possibly plant into the first week or two of May, and then we do not plant anymore throughout throughout the summer. Now, with that said, I realize we do have a representative of a nursery here, and they would like to have folks plant year round, which I understand. The thing is, you're going to use more water. And that's really what it comes to. So for us, when we look at planting, our projects are a little different because it's not just a garden, and it's not just us, you know, doing it as a hobby or wanting to attract small pockets of habitat. We're looking at, you know, acres of habitat. So we have to factor in a number of conditions. The cooler the temperature, the less we're going to have to go out there to irrigate. Most of our irrigation is hand irrigated, so we use a lot of volunteer energy, and it for us, we just have a much higher survival rate on our plants when we do not plant during the summer, because we also water them, and it may think for that establishment period, we will cut a plant off, I say about 2 years, and some folks do as short as 6 months. What I like to do is make sure that our plants go through all the seasons. So making sure they have a summer, winter, fall, spring, and we do that twice to see if they're established, and then we cut them off. Yeah.
Kind of one super quick thing to that, sorry, is that I definitely agree with everything Marco said, but there's one bit of nuance that there are a few plants which are summer growers. The vast majority of California natives are growing, taking their water in the winter and growing in the winter, but then you have this small little subset, which includes milkweed. That's probably the one that's the most common, that you actually do want to plant later because it doesn't start growing until it gets really hot. And then the other exception to planting later would be certain desert grasses that are kind of included in the native palette that grow in the summertime, as well as the plants that would grow in wet areas, the riparian plants. So if you have like a little water feature and you're planting around that, we do recommend that you plant that in mid to late spring throughout the summer. But by and large, it's really when it's cold out and rainy, that's when you want to be planting.
Definitely have people sharing stories about planting that did not go according to planned. Someone is asking, can you share which are your top plant recommendations to attract Western bluebirds? I know everybody stopped to think for a sec. John, you had the best thinking face. Does that mean that you have an answer for this one, or do you want to turn it over to everybody else?
I could give it a go. I think so. I think the Western sycamore. That I mean, if people have, you know, space, it's great to have trees, right? I think that our oaks are fantastic. Western sycamores, Western bluebirds are cavity nesters. So I think that if you can leave plants in that will have cavities that they can nest in, you won't need to provide nest boxes then they'll help provide food as well. Those would be some of the options I would think of. So oaks and sycamores, I don't know. I'd pass it over to
definitely the trees. And like this is always going to be involved in the process. Where we see most bluebirds are in the parks that have lawn, and the reason being is that they are looking for the insects and the worms, because when they're around this area, they're starting to nest, so they're looking for that protein. So you also have to when you're looking to attract certain species, understand when those species are going to be around. Is this their home range? Are they here throughout the year? Because then that approach to attracting them will be a little different. If you're in Los Angeles, you're only going to see them when it's their nesting time. So really what you would be doing if you didn't have cavities in your trees, you would then be putting up a bluebird box, nesting box. So that would possibly attract them. And then anything that is going to promote the little small bugs and worms, all of that will attract these birds, especially the birds that are scavenging around. And that's it's hard to say when they're coming in and out of town.
One of the questions that keeps coming up is this idea of hybrid natives. So could you address hybrid natives versus true natives, using the Cleveland sage as the example? What are the benefits for wildlife for these hybrids?
Yeah, so I think what people are referring to is what they call nativars, which aren't necessarily hybrids. They're actually more commonly selections that people found in the wild that had some interesting mutation, like the leaf was a different shape, or the flowers were bigger, or the plant just had a different stature than normal. And that plant has been cloned over and over because it's more suitable to a garden conditions. So they're a cultivar, which is essentially a selection of plants made out of native plants. And there's a term for them in the horticulture industry called nativars. And there's been this discussion ongoing for the last couple of years: is are nativars better or worse than your straight species native plants? So the straight species are the ones that are all genetically distinct, and that's the kind of plants you're going to get in a nursery like Los Nogales. It's a restoration focused nursery. Each plant coming from Los Nogales is its own plant. It's usually they're all grown from seed, and they're each their own genetically distinct individual. Whereas if you buy Ceanothus concha from a native plant nursery, every single Ceanothus concha is genetically identical to the other Ceanothus concha. They're all cloned from the same mother stock or mother plant. This is a very hot topic, a controversial topic in the native plant world. And there are some papers which incorporate a little bit of research from the West Coast, but it's primarily East Coast and Midwest, that because the nativars, the cultivars have been selected to be different than the wild type plants, they're not as beneficial to I believe this study focused on insect pollinators. I don't think it was focusing on birds, but have to refresh myself. But it did show a decline in kind of use by wildlife on the plants that have been artificially selected for the ornamental horticulture trade. So I think the jury's out on that to some extent, because like I said, most of the plants you're going to buy in a nursery that are cultivars came from the wild. They're not really that different than the wild type. They just look a little different. But then there are certainly some which are hybridized with a native plant hybridized with a non-native plant that are the phenology is going to be different. The timing of everything's going to be different. They may look different. In a case like a plant that say it was I can't think of a native example of this, but if it was a camellia or a rose that had double flowers, then you're not probably getting any nectar or pollen to support wildlife at all. So I think a mix is fine, but when in doubt, you might as well plant a straight species. The challenge there is that people like these cultivars because they're really beautiful. They're going to be really reliable in a garden setting, versus a individual plant, that's grown from seed. It's just like people, everybody's going to look different. Every plant's going to look a little different. And some of them are going to be super vigorous and beautiful. And some of them are going to be more, only have a few flowers. So it's a little more, you're kind of up to chance when you're growing those types of straight species plants. But yeah, we could do a whole conversation about this one question, because it's very, very interesting. I'll try to dig up the paper and put it in the chat about nativars versus versus straight species.
And we have some individuals that are looking for requests. What are some natives that are good for more shaded areas. I'm not sure who might want to jump something that would grow well in a shaded area.
Do you want to? And I could start off. I think that probably we all have our thoughts and opinions on that. So I mentioned coffeeberry earlier. Coffeeberry, I think, does pretty well in shade. We have it here, and the ones that seem to thrive the most are the ones that are in the shade rather than the full sun. I think heuchera, I mentioned that as always also as well. I think that does well in more shady environments or kind of understory. It's more of a ground covery type of species that does well in shade. Yeah, I'm passing. Pass.
Ribes, so the different currants are very shade adapted. There's something like the Catalina perfume, really durable, tough, shade tolerant plant. And it's always a good thing in Southern California to find shade and drought tolerant. That combination of they can be really dry, but they also don't need a lot of sun. And Ribes viburnifolium, the Catalina perfume, is a great example of that. So another plug for our upcoming garden tour, the photo behind me is at a garden called the LA Native Plant Source Garden. It's on the tour this year. It's in Highland Park, actually pretty close to Deb's. It's absolutely stunning, and the whole garden is based off of the understory of coast live oaks. So things like the Humboldt lily will grow in the shade of oaks. He's got tons of hummingbird sage. He's got all sorts of ferns, really interesting ferns, native ferns. So there's a really beautiful kind of tradition of shade growing with natives, and I would definitely recommend if you're going to be available this weekend, go on the garden tour and check out the LA Native Plant Source Garden, which is all about shade gardening with natives.
There is a question about irrigation. So someone is trying to figure out, there's no research supporting the idea that native plants cannot thrive when irrigated with drip. So would anybody like to share their experience with that?
Wait, well, can you ask that question
Would
again?
native plants survive or thrive when irrigated with drip?
I think really what it comes down to is how often you're watering it, because it could be with drip, it could be there's like a small leaching tube that they have, and then people hand water. So really what it comes down to is how often you're watering, because you can set your drip irrigation for 2 hours and it would give the same amount of water. The difference between the drip irrigation is that it's the same amount of water over a longer period of time. What it comes down to, I think, is when you're looking at your native plants and your garden and your plan. Again, Evan was talking about the two groups of people, the one that is going to plan it out, and then the one that is popping in there when they can, which I've done both. What is the goal of your garden? Are you looking to be in your garden doing work often, because hand watering or watering is going to be a key? Or do you want to set it and forget it? And drip irrigation, having things on a timer, is going to be so helpful, because that your plants are getting irrigated. But I've seen plants thrive on drip irrigation, and then it gets to a certain point, it reaches that 2-year mark that I have for my plants, and then we just turn it off, and then it kind of lives on. What I would suggest under any circumstance, it doesn't matter how you're watering, that you create a berm around all of your plants. And what it is, it's kind of like a bowl where and your plant is in the middle, because whatever water goes into that space will be retained in that area, so that water can then infiltrate straight down versus you have drip irrigation and it's just running off to the side. So one thing you're going to want to do is to make sure that you do have an established berm, and that when you can, mulch as much as you can. Mulch is magic. It does all sorts of great, wonderful things.
And we have some individuals that are trying to start their own butterfly gardens. And there were some questions about milkweed. What milkweed should be planted in Southern California?
Oh, another controversy in the native plant world. It's good that people care about this stuff enough to take sides. And I and Theodore Payne are firmly in the native milkweed camp. There's been a lot of discussion about this recently, because a lot of the milkweed that's planted in Southern California is tropical milkweed, Asclepias cursavica. That is different than all of our native milkweeds in that it stays up all year. It doesn't go dormant. And that has both created issues with migratory cycles as well as harboring pathogens that are dangerous to the monarchs. So we advocate for the planting of native milkweed. Probably the most common one that we sell at our nursery is narrowleaf milkweed, Asclepias fascicularis. But there's a number of others that we get from time to time. Fascicularis is by far the easiest one. Some of the other ones are a little more finicky to grow in a garden setting. But fascicularis is quite easy. I can attest to the fact that they support monarchs, because we have a huge stand of it right outside my office, and it's covered in monarch caterpillars right now. And then you know that you're doing it in a way that it's not messing with the migratory cycle of those butterflies. And so it's a bit contentious, because there is a whole other group of people who think that we should just embrace the fact that migratory cycles have been messed up now, and we should just kind of try to encourage overwintering populations of monarch. And so it's a ongoing debate, but I do think that if you do have the tropical milkweed in your yard, I would recommend cutting it down at around the time that the native milkweeds are going dormant, at least, because then you're going to at least be kind of signifying to the butterflies that they're in a natural native habitat.
Follow-up question. What about milkweed for Northern California?
So there's certainly a lot of native milkweeds up there. Honestly, I don't know which one. I'm very Southern California centric in my plant knowledge, but if you go to your local California Native Plant Society chapter, or your Xerces Society, local Xerces Society, they're gonna tell you kind of which milkweed is gonna work best. Or just go to your local native plant nursery. And if you're up in the Bay Area, there's tons of great ones, tons of great nurseries up there. And if you're further north than that, yeah, I would check with your local CNPS chapter.
There's something else you wanted to add, John?
No, I agree with all of that. And I think that Molly had put in the chat earlier that Audubon does have a native plants database that people can actually look to, using their zip code, can look to see what plants are native to their local area. And milkweeds are one of the groups of plants that are in there. So people could use that as a reference too. But CNPS is a great source as well.
Thank you. And what would any of you recommend to combat soil erosion for dryish soil on a creek bed, specifically in West LA?
Oh, there's so many follow-up questions.
I know,
So that,
same, but
it's like,
let's go with
is
soil
it a dry
erosion.
creek bed, so it's not getting any creek water? Like, those are the things that I'm looking at. Usually when I'm trying to combat erosion, what I try to do is put in trees or shrubs that are going to have a root structure that will be able to hold that slope in, and in that process, because it'll take a while for trees or shrubs to grow, you can do some smaller growing natives. One thing that we look at, so if it was around there. So you're looking at willow. The thing is, it's so hard to really say without knowing the exact location, because if it's no longer supporting a floodplain or getting the water that it would historically get, putting riparian vegetation there will kind of set it up to not do as well, because it does require more water. So if it is getting water, then those would be plants that would do really well, like sycamore in the back. But if it's not, and it's just like a historical creek, I would look at some of the coastal sage scrub that we do have that produce habitat that they have low or like the roots are not as binding as tree roots, but what happens is when you cover the soil itself, it protects it from the elements, so it's not drying out as fast. The wind is not pounding on it. When it rains, the water is able to slow down and infiltrate into the soil versus just run off. Whatever you do not plant ice plant. Whatever you do not plant ice plant, because that is used along a lot of the beach communities on the cliffs, because it's a ground cover. But the thing is, anything that is a succulent doesn't take a lot of water, but it holds a lot of water. So you're essentially putting tons of weight on a cliff or an area that you're trying to prevent erosion from, and it's just a matter of time, because all of that weight is then going to pull the cliff down or the area down. So hopefully some of that was useful. I would look for a tree with roots that would be able to bind it in.
Thank you. And I know we are getting real close to 1 o'clock. We do have a couple more questions. I think this one's directed toward you, John. So tell us a little bit more about the online catalogs to find native plants. What kind of information would it tell us? Like how much shade a plant needs? What kind of information can they find?
Great question. So our native plants database does not, so it basically, with your zip code, it will tell you what plants are local to your area, what birds they could support based on the resources those plants provide, again, either directly or indirectly. And then it will connect you to your local Audubon, if there is one, and other local resources. So your local California Native Plant Society, other resources that are in the local area, and places where you can buy them, like the Theodore Payne Foundation certainly is prominently featured in there. So each plant has a brief description, and we will talk about things like soil type, sunshade, those sorts of things, but we don't have a filtering ability on that. There's so many, and like I think all realize that we're incredibly blessed to live in a place like California, where there is incredible diversity of native plants and an incredible diversity of habitats and habitat types. And so even within one zip code, there can be a variety of different types of microhabitats, microclimates. And so it's a complicated thing, and we need to, I think we need to really talk to people about what their needs are specific. Like these types of questions that people are bringing into the chat are really important, because there's a lot of detail and a lot of nuance that needs to be. And a lot of, as Marcos has said, it's like the timing of the watering, the cycling through the year and everything is really important. So so that's how ours operates. There's certainly are other sources of information on that online. CalFlora has a really great database as well that talks about the native plants. So I think that exploring all of those resources, and in particular having going and connecting with folks that actually can share their knowledge as well, is really important. And again, we have an incredible resource here in Southern California at Theodore Payne for that.
A great follow-up, another question that's been asked a couple of times is, what's the best place to purchase native plants? I don't know if we know any places in Northern California that we could also share, but yeah, good places to purchase native plants.
I can shout out, well, here in LA to start, obviously Theodore Payne. I appreciate all the love from Audubon today, but there's some other really great LA-based spots. So there's some small, really cool like boutique nurseries in the city. One is Artemisian Nursery, run by my good friend and fellow bandmate Nicole Calhoun. Marcos has been to one of our shows at Artemisia. We have a band that we play called Sage Against the Machine. And the other is Plant Material. They have 3 locations, and they also do native. Both of those shops, they're not exclusively native, but they have a lot of really awesome native plants with good climate appropriate non-natives, as well as veggies and houseplants, both of them. In Northern California, there's a bunch of really good ones. I love someone just put out Las Politas. That's a great nursery. Well, why don't I stay a little bit more in Southern California? Tree of Life, if you're down in San Clemente area, that's an amazing nursery. Up in the Bay Area, I would go with, so Annie's Annuals has a really nice selection of native plants, and they don't do only natives, they have just a great selection in general. Cal Flora Nursery is really great. I mean, there's a lot, and I think the best place to find nurseries is calscape.org, which has all the nurseries listed. And there's something like 100, and I think they've identified 120 nurseries in California that have native plants in some level. So it's definitely a growing number.
The native plants for birds, if you go to the website, you can type in your zip code, and then it'll pull up nurseries in your area that carry native plants as well.
Yep. Neil's Nursery is really cool down in San Diego. They come up here, and this is the community of people growing native plants is awesome. There's so many good nurseries, good nursery people. There's a campaign that Native Plant Society is doing right now called Bloom California. That's been really neat to promote native plants as sort of a domestic crop of California, and try to make it more of an industry that has a voice in the way that like these bigger almond growers associations and wine growers, all those large kind of conglomerates of different farms. We're trying to do that with the native plant world, and really embrace the fact that we need to change the entire landscape of California. And there's some numbers of just how far we have to go. I believe, and I could be wrong on the exact number, but it's right in this ballpark, something like 3 or 4% of the total nursery plant sales currently in California are native. So we have a long way to go. It's a very small amount, and that's pretty much you. If you want to, check me on that, just drive around, check, see if that's true, just drive around Los Angeles or drive around Sacramento or San Francisco, and what percentage of the landscapes you see are native. Go to any box store department, box store landscape area. You might have a few natives here and there, but primarily it's all imported non-native plants. So there's a lot of work to be done to get to what we're talking about.
We are down to the last 2 minutes, and there are a couple questions that we were not able to get to, so I apologize to everyone, but I do want to give our panelists a chance to share any other tips or any other things that they would find helpful for anybody who is trying to plant native plants.
Real quick, I would just share that in this process of finding your garden and finding your space in your garden and making this transition to native plants, just have that mindfulness of when you share your passion, that you share it with care. I learned in communicating with my kids at the time that they're preschoolers, I had to often tell them to don't yuck anyone's yum. And I think that is our biggest challenge as folks that are really into native plants, is we're so into it that we tell everyone what they're doing wrong about their garden. And that's not a great way to really make that transition. So let your passion be your guide. Let them see how into your garden you are, and all the benefits, all the birds, all the money you're saving on not having, or all the water you're saving on not having to water lawn, all those great things. But do it mindfully, because we all started at one place, and a lot of this is very cultural. So I could share how wonderful my plants are at the garden, but my grandma is never going to get rid of her orchids or her Gebra Santa or anything that is medicinal, because there's a cultural connection there. So I just want to throw that out there, that we can share our love for natives, but also make sure that we're not yucking anyone's yum.
Thank you for that, Marcos. John or Evan, do either one of you want to share any other tips before we close?
I just want to, agree with what Marcos just said. I think the best way to advance this movement is to be open and welcoming and not shaming anyone or acting as if, we've got all the answers, you better listen to us, because that's just not the way that you convince people. So embracing everybody who's into plants with love, and just showing them that there's this other way of doing it, and thinking about the environmental impacts of your garden. And my one other piece of advice is, if you're just starting out into this, find a friend, go to a meeting, meet somebody, go check out their garden, go on a hike with somebody, go to an Audubon gathering, show up at your local planting day at Debs Park. Do this as part of a community, and not just being on the internet and being by yourself. I mean, you can do that if that's what you want to do. That's totally fine. But this is about, making connections and finding the humanity within this whole process. And I am lucky to live in this world and get to be in it day in, day out, because there's just so many amazing people and friendships and relationships that have gone for many years, or that are coming out of this this community. So if you're just getting into it, appreciate the plants, appreciate the birds, but also appreciate all the wonderful people who are working alongside you to change the landscape.
John, anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just bring it home. I guess I totally agree with what Marcos and Evan said, and I think that we should try to focus on joy, right? Like I think that by planting natives, we can bring more birds into the habitat, and that brings us all joy. But thinking about what brings you joy as well. I have 2 fruit trees in my yard. They aren't native, but they bring us joy, right? Marcos is abuela, right? I mean, that, it's just like there's not enough joy in this world, and if we can embrace that a little bit more, I think we'll all be better off. That'd be my part.
Thank you to everybody who joined us. Thank you to our panelists for answering all of these questions. We really, really appreciate it. So many amazing questions and resources were shared. There will be a follow-up email where we can share what was shared with all of you. So stay tuned for the next Native Plants Q&A webinar, which will be in July of 2022. And check out that website. If you can, come out and visit us, or be a part of the Theodore Payne Garden Tour. You'll get an opportunity to see how individuals have been able to transform their spaces. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much.